Hi everybody, it's Krish Kandai here. Sorry I had some technical difficulties, so we're a bit late. Wasn't my intention, so sorry about that. I tried a new setup and it completely bombed. So hopefully this is now working. It's what are we on? Day 4 of being locked down in the UK. Now I know many people around the world have it far worse than us here. I was hearing from friends in places like Sri Lanka and Italy how bad it is. And so I'm sorry if I've come across a little bit kind of middle class and disconnected from some of the real challenges going on around the world. But yeah, it's different, isn't it? I guess we're experiencing some sort of solidarity with people around the world who've had to live in lockdown for a long time. Think about people in places like Syria who couldn't go outside for fear of getting shot or blown up. Now, our lock-in is a lot more relaxed and luxurious than theirs. So we're just tasting some of the things that people around the world have been experiencing for quite a long time. But I've been trying to use this different pace of life. I've been working at my desk all day. I've had lots of meetings and strategy meetings and trying to help the Home for Good team kind of think differently about how we operate in this new moment. But I've also been trying just to use this different pace of life to spend a bit more time reflecting on the Bible, trying to think about my relationship with God. And we've created a little discipline around our dinner table. We try to talk about the Bible story that we're going to be exploring in our little videos together as a family. And normally that's fantastic, but today, man, the passage was so difficult. This is a not safe for family. I'd say think of ways to reframe and rephrase this story because it's so difficult, so painful. And we're going to be looking at the story of Hagar. And if you're not familiar with the story of Hagar, it comes in the Old Testament. It comes in the book of Genesis, which is the origin story, not just of the universe, but particularly of the people of God, Israel. And the mum and dad, the parents of Israel are Abraham and Sarah. And we were reflecting yesterday how they've experienced some form of social isolation, haven't they? By leaving all the things that they knew that were safe and secure, going to a far country and living a very insecure life, living in tents rather than the homes they would have been used to. And in the middle of the Abraham and Sarah story is quite a tragic story around a little... I think a young woman named Hagar. And trigger alert, this is difficult to hear. It's going to raise up some big questions. But actually, I think it's sometimes in the difficult parts of the Bible where we find treasure. Things that we might not have explored before that will actually help us. And my hope here is to offer you some encouragement. However you're feeling in the middle of this global pandemic with rising anxiety and fear out there, maybe there are bits of this story that you can relate to. And maybe you'll discover a different and fresh kind of engagement with God. And if you're someone with a whole bunch of questions, I love questions, so please send me a question and I'll be happy to answer it. But I'm going to read from the book of Genesis, chapter 16, verse 1, and it goes like this. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said to Abraham, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abraham agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with her, with Hagar, and she conceived. Now, this is a really tough story because we love Abraham and Sarah. We love their heroic journey. We love their faith and how through this barren couple, through this couple, as we mentioned yesterday, who were as good as dead, God starts a nation. And that's amazing. But this is a troublesome story because of the way that Hagar is treated. Hagar is a young woman. She's on her own. That puts her in a vulnerable category. In those days, she's Egyptian, living with a Jewish family. That's an interesting role reversal when you get to the book of Exodus, where it's Jewish people living under slavery to an Egyptian superpower. This way, it's the other way around. An Egyptian has no power, and the Jewish people in the story have a lot of power. And I don't know if you noticed, but Sarai comes up with this plan about how she's going to form a family. Abraham agrees, and no one seems to ask Hagar if she's happy to be the means by which the family is started. Perhaps I can build a family through her. She seems to be instrumentalized. She seems to be objectified. And that's a big problem, because this runs counter to a Christian understanding, or a biblical understanding of the human person. Christians believe that every single human being is made in the image of God and then worthy of respect and dignity and compassion. But that is not how Hagar is being treated in this. She's being used as an object for Sarai to get what she wants, and seemingly Abraham to get what he wants. So this is difficult. And in the middle of this, some more power dynamics come into play. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abraham, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now she knows she is pregnant. She despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." Oh my goodness. That blame game is going on. Blame throwing is happening everywhere. It was Sarah's idea, but Abraham slept with her, and now there's jealousy and broken relationships. Some see in this story a implicit critique of polygamy, that we were supposed to be one man, one woman, and everywhere where polygamous relationships happen, it seems to break down. So maybe that's what's going on here as well. Verse 6, Abraham says, "Your servant is in your hands," Abraham said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Oh my goodness, again, this is supposed to be the father of the faith. This is the man who believes in God and it's credited to him as righteousness. He says, "It's your servant, do whatever you want." That's a problem. This is not right behavior. Now, the reason why this is problematic is sometimes when we look at the Old Testament stories, we just use them as moral character studies, that we use them as moral exemplars. Abraham did this, so we should do that. And we've got to be really careful how we do that. Yesterday, when we were looking at the story of Abraham and Sarah, I used the book of Hebrews, which gives us a model of how we're supposed to understand the Genesis story. So I was letting Hebrews guide us about what the lessons we're supposed to be learning. So we need to be careful. Just because Abraham and Sarah did something, it doesn't mean God is endorsing it. This is a description, not a prescription. This is how things were, not how things ought to have been. So that's an important distinction. Here we go. Verse 6. "Your servant is in your hands," Abraham said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai ill-treated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was a spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord added, "I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now with child, and you will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility towards all his brothers." She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abraham a son, and Abraham gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. This is such a hard story. So what's happened? Sarai has ill-treated Hagar, and so she's rightly so, run out of that really dangerous situation, run into the wilderness. And it's there in that socially isolated place, there in her moment of difficulty, the lowest of the low moments, that the angel of the Lord comes, or the presence of God comes to her. And it's quite beautiful what happens here. And, there are big questions. Why didn't God intervene earlier? Why didn't God punish Abraham and Sarah? That all gets worked out later in the story. But for this moment, it's in her desperation, it's in her isolation that Hagar meets God. And the things that she discovers are really beautiful. And I think it helps us understand a few things about the nature of faith in our difficult times, our faith in isolation. I think firstly, we see that faith meets us in difficult places. Sometimes it is in the disaster, in our desperation, in our fear, in our brokenness, that we come closest to God. It's like all the other things that we thought would give us some level of security and hope and comfort, when they get stripped away, we realize how much we need God. It's a little bit like when you're swimming, and as a kid I used to like to swim, but only in the shallow end, because I wasn't really swimming, I was just standing up. But you only know you can really swim when you're out of your depth, aren't you? Then you're having to rely on your skill and your ability to float. Long story short, I was once told I wasn't able to float because I'm brown, and obviously brown people have a denser bone structure, apparently. That's what my swimming teacher told me. It turned out I just read a book called How to Speak to Racists, and it's rubbish, not actually true at all. Anyway, so it's when we're out of our depth, we know what we can really trust in, and that's Hagar's story. It's when she's far away from everything she thought she could rely on that God meets her. And so faith meets us in some difficult circumstances, in some difficult places. And I'm hoping that for many of us, this really difficult moment in history, this unprecedented, it's been said so many times, occurrence in many generations, when all the normality of life has been stripped away, it might be there that we can find God, or God can find us. And I love the fact that Hagar says, she gave this name to the Lord, who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." It's almost like she thought she was invisible. She wasn't really a person anymore. And, she was used as an object. She was used as a womb, a surrogate, a means to an end. She was instrumentalized, but God is the one who sees her. And that's such an important idea. Maybe you're living on your own. Maybe no one's rung you today. Maybe it's difficult to know if anyone is out there. Well, at least I can tell you that God sees you, that he knows your circumstances. In the New Testament, it says even the very hairs on your head are numbered. God knows the details of your life. He's not unaware of what's going on. And maybe if we're willing, we can reach out to him in these dark moments. I think the second thing that is in this passage is a pretty hard message, actually. The angel of the Lord said to Hagar, verse 9, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." This seems totally wrong, doesn't it? Like, surely the angel of the Lord should say, "I've seen how they treated you. I've seen you've been dehumanized. Don't worry, I'm with you. It's time to escape." We want the freedom movement that happened in the kind of abolitionist movement with the ending of slavery. We want William Wilberforce to set her free, but God sends her back. I mean, it's just horrific, and actually things don't go easy when she does go back. And somehow, mysteriously, God is using this really difficult set of circumstances to meet and help, encourage and bless Hagar. And so it's hard for me to say it, but faith sends us to some difficult places. We saw that with Abraham and Sarah. They were asked to leave their security, everything that they knew that was okay in their lives, and sent into the wilderness, sent into a foreign country. Well, this sending is even harder, I think. It's sending Hagar, a young pregnant woman, back to the mistress that had abused her and manipulated her. And it reminds me of another New Testament story, actually, where it's in the letter to Philemon. It's the shortest book, I think, maybe Jude's shorter. It's one of the shortest books in the Bible. And a slave, a runaway slave, becomes a Christian and meets Paul. And Paul asks him to return to his slave master, and hoping that the gospel could be brought back through this slave to the slave master. And so sometimes our God asks us to trust him as he sends us into difficult circumstances. Jesus was sent by God into the desert to be tested. And so it's possible even in these difficult moments, God might be asking us to do difficult things, to trust him, to reach out in compassion and love to people around us, to go against the flow of the hoarding and the retreating, and not wanting to spread the virus, but just to spread kindness and compassion in an appropriate way. We might be sent to some difficult places. But I think the other thing to say is that faith sustains us in those difficult places. I know when the closest I've ever been to a circumstance like this was when my wife and I were living in Albania, and we had to be in lockdown because there was a crisis that broke out in the nation. Anarchy broke out, and a million Kalashnikov rifles in the hands of ordinary civilians. And I remember we were having to shelter under the table because there were so many machine gun bullets flying around, and they were all being shot in the air, but bullets that are shot in the air come back down again. And it was there that we really kind of rediscovered how much we needed God. It was there we rediscovered how to pray. It's there we found great solace in the Psalms and trying to memorize them and speak them to each other. And it was there in the difficult place that faith sustained us. And maybe with this difficult and different pace of life, it's an opportunity for us to reconnect with God, to allow God to meet us in this difficult place, allow God to send us to some difficult places, but also allow God to revitalize us, bring us back to life in the midst of these really difficult circumstances. I don't know, what do you think? I do find this a difficult story. It kind of gets a bit worse because after she does go back, Sarah becomes a mum, and then their kids grow up, and it seems that there was a bit of an age gap. Obviously Ishmael is older, possibly up to 13 years old, I think I heard, 13 years older than Isaac, the birth son of Abraham and Sarah. And let me read you this bit, chapter 21 verse 8. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, oh my goodness, she keeps being described as other, different, far, this is not going well for Sarah and Abraham. And it's definitely not going well for Hagar. But Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abraham, was mocking. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Oh, wow. There's a whole bunch of things about how porous the walls of a family are, how you treat non-birth children, surrogacy. I got a whole, mindset around adoption. Save it for another time, or ask me a question about it. Verse 11, the matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. So Abraham felt fatherly towards his son. But God said to him, do not be distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you. Now that's tough, isn't it? Because now it seems to be God endorsing Sarah's ill treatment of Hagar and the son. I would read this as God superintending and finding a way to work good out of some really difficult circumstances. I don't know if you saw today, Mr. T, my favourite of the 18 members, tweeted out Romans 8:28, for we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. And people overuse that verse, but I think I hold on to an idea of the sovereignty of God here, that God, even though Sarah's been wicked, God can use these really difficult circumstances to restore and help Hagar and to build a nation through Ishmael. Let's have a look. He says, listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then set her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. What a picture of desperation. She's so desperate. She's given the last of the water to the child, and now she thinks she's going to die, so she leaves the boy under a bush and can't watch, just sits far away and then just begins to cry. What an absolute picture of desperation. And again, what do we find? Faith comes to meet us in difficult places. Look what happens. Verse 17, God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. Maybe that's why he talks about the bow shot. Became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. If before we heard that God saw Hagar, she was not invisible. She was known to him. He is the God who sees. Now we seem to be being told he is the God who hears. He hears the sobs of a poor boy abandoned under a bush. Even that boy is not too far for God to hear the cry. And there's a resonance here, because when the Egyptians capture and enslave the Jewish nation and they cry out to God, it says God heard the cry of his people. God is attentive to our prayers. Even if our prayers are just sobs and groans, God hears us. And again, whatever you're going through, however difficult it is to reconcile what's happening with God's good purposes, we're reminded in this story that God is a God who hears, and he keeps his promises. He does turn Ishmael into a great nation, and historically, or at least according to the Islamic nations, they would trace their heritage back to Ishmael. And that again raises some fantastic questions that we'll have to look at another day. Anyway, I guess we're saying for Hagar, there were some long-term challenges, and yet still in every of her lowest moments, God still met her. And that's my prayer for you. However low things get, however difficult your circumstances are, wherever you are in the world, I want you to know that there is a God who sees you and a God who hears you. So hang on. And in the end, God will work out his purposes, whether that's life now or that's life everlasting. We do have a God that we can hold on to, however bad it gets. Now, if this has been helpful to you, please share it, let other people know it's there. I'm uploading these onto Facebook, but also onto YouTube, and ask questions. I'd love to know which passages of the Bible really resonate with you at this time. Or maybe there are some big kind of theological, practical, apologetics questions that are in your head that you think, oh man, I really don't know what to do with that. Or if you could think of someone that you think would enjoy this and it would help encourage them, maybe they're going through a tough time right now, please share it. And yeah, it's been lovely to spend some time with you. Hope you have a fantastic evening. If you were watching yesterday, our family was thinking of getting an emergency emotional support Rottweiler. Good news, that's no longer on the agenda. I'm just hoping someone in our family doesn't now want an emergency support snake. But watch this space, because everything's changing every day. All right, have a good evening. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.